Good doom evening. Now that the first presidential debate is in the books, and now that the presidential election is coming nearer and nearer, I'm starting to review multiple reports from municipalities saying that they're preparing for extreme civil unrest. And I'm also hearing reports and seeing reports that apparently that all of us are clueless and essentially something is right around the corner that can happen. And so I asked myself, what does that mean? Is that some type of potential food shortage, potential cyber disruption? Is the grid going to go down? I'm not 100% sure, but what I do know for sure is we're living in a society that is incredibly divided and incredibly polarized. If you don't believe me, we just got done with the debate. Go on social media. If Harris wins, there's going to be people that hate. If Trump wins, there's going to be people that hate. And so if there's a horrible, potentially bad situation right around the corner, well, I want to know how to prepare for it. And I want to know whether or not it's fear mongering, or are these reports something that we should be legitimately concerned about? And so I'm happy that Jack is here, Melody is here, my friends, to share some important perspective on whether or not these things may be happening and what we can do as Americans to potentially, guys, prepare for civil unrest. How you guys doing?
I'm good, Trav. How you doing?
After that intro, how are you doing, Travis?
I'm doing well. I got a lot to live up to when I'm recording with Jack, obviously. So, I want to jump right in. Obviously, elections are right around the corner. One of the things I hear from comments and from reports that I'm, looking into, and something I thought myself is, and I'm in Texas, guys. I'm around hurricanes. What if the grid goes down, right? What if we lose power? And that's a legitimate concern, I think, for me. But what if, the whole grid goes down? And what if the grid went down right before voting? What if there was that type of disruption? The grid goes down, we lose power for 2 weeks, power comes back on, then maybe the election continues. I mean, do you guys think that the grid going down one way or the other right before elections is a legitimate concern? And can we start with Melody, and then Jack, I'd like you to respond to what Melody says.
Well, Travis, I think that, I think you and I have both seen that, what I forget his name, last name Grice, I think, just about how susceptible our grid is, how aging it is. And so I personally, I'm not focused on that in terms of that happening before the election, but I do think that people need to understand how insecure the grid actually is. And I think, Travis, honestly, you could tell people more than most what's happened to you down in Texas. I think a lot of times, we're just so used to the power coming up. But if you were in New Orleans during Katrina, you wouldn't be. If you were in New York when the power went down in 2002, you would know this is a real possibility that you could be stranded. We all had to walk across the bridge. Like, we couldn't actually, get out of the city any other way. So I think that a lot of times we live, as humans, we have to believe that things are going to be okay. And we don't want to think about these things unless you've been in that type of situation, which I have. I was in New York for September 11th. I didn't go to work that day because my sister had flown in the day before and I took the day off. And so, having experienced something like that, I certainly didn't wake up on that Tuesday thinking that, I would lose one of my best friends. But that's what happened. And that the city would be shut down for months. For those of you that didn't live there, you don't realize, like, we couldn't take the subway. You might try to get to work. They would evacuate us, people with machine guns. And so that happened overnight. Our lives changed. So, I think in general, we have to be more aware of just how fragile the grid actually is and be thinking about, okay, would I be able to make it for a week, 2 weeks? What's my game plan? And so I got to be honest, and I could be wrong about this. I'm not as concerned about it from a, nearing the election perspective, but I do think it's something people should be aware of and be planning for.
Right. And certainly, us having a down grid during the election would compound the anxiety, would compound the civil unrest. Right. Now, Jack, can you respond to Melody? Is this thinking the grid would go down right before election, during voting. Fear mongering or legitimate concern?
It's not going to be very doomy of me, Travis, but I'm going to go lean towards fear mongering. The grid going down right before the election. All right, 2020s. Let's not rule anything out. The things we've seen in this decade, and it's not even halfway over yet. So let's not rule anything out. But that being said, you're talking about two things that would have to line up perfectly. The odds of that happening, I think there are far more realistic things to be fearful of and prepared for than widespread grid outages coinciding with a presidential election. Now, that being said, what Melody said about the grid is accurate. We've done a lot. We've debated and we've talked and we've passed all these bills about modernizing the power grid in the last 20 years. And we've done precisely bupkis to actually make the grid more reliable. We've actually done a lot to make the grid less reliable because of the over-subsidization from the government at federal, state, and local levels towards renewables. We've built out so much intermittent power supply, and those renewables, because the subsidy structure and the tax credits are so generous, they can actually afford to operate at a loss and still be profitable. They can sell their power to the point where power prices have gone negative in certain markets. And these renewable generators are actually paying the grid to take the power they're generating because they collect so much in tax credits for just generating that power that they're still turning a profit. That has driven baseload generators like coal, nuclear, and to a lesser extent, natural gas. That has driven a lot of baseload generators out of business. Now, baseload works 24/7, day or night. Intermittent works when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. And so what we've got is we've got a grid that is now more reliable on intermittent power sources than it's ever been. And we have less of that baseload generation to take up the slack when that intermittent power is not available. And that's how you end up with situations like that 2021 outage in Texas during the deep freeze that was massively destructive for the economy of Texas, a lot of property losses. So I do think I echo Melody's concerns about the grid. I think we're still moving in the wrong direction of the grid. And now we have this massive build out of data centers that's going on in the United States. So we're adding massive new sources of power demand while doing very little to address the supply issue, and in some cases hurting the supply situation. So I think the grid will continue to get worse. That being said, power outage on election day, I'm going to go with a little bit on the fear mongering side. Not very doomy of me. I know.
No, but we're asking you to be honest, Jack. I mean, that's the thing that we're really after here. And honestly, I got to tell you the truth about something. Yeah, 2021 was bad in Texas with the freeze, with the grid. But to be honest, for me, it was worse 3 months ago with the hurricane. You remember? You remember that? Dude, so, I hear what you're saying, but it's hard for me because I'm living the opposite of confidence, right? Because I see the grid going down. I see it going down for a couple of weeks. I see what it does to people. The first day, it's okay. But as more and more time goes on and people don't have access to food, stores, Wi-Fi, internet, I mean, I'm not saying they turn to animals, but I mean, it gets a little dicey.
Lord of the Flies, real quick. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the
Melody,
things,
Travis had the conch. Come on.
but seriously, guys, I think about this stuff and because I do worry about the grid because I have to, because it goes down all the time here. I'm in the Panhandle, right? Some of the things that I did, and this is recent, and it cost me a lot of money, and I had to ask myself, do I invest in my family or what, right? So I purchased a portable solar generator, real nice generator, has solar panels, because my thought process is if I have to leave, or even if I have to stay here in my house, bunker up here in my house, at least I have something where I could create my own energy. And that's my premise. Or I also have like MREs and all of those types of things. But, when I really think about it, Jack, especially, and this is from both of you, both of you guys helped me come to the conclusion that we really can't trust a lot of people. But, another thing is, I live right next to the border. And so I read these reports, and not necessarily how many people are coming in. I read the reports on terrorism and how many people they're screening. And I've seen the 5,000 or some crazy jump in terrorists trying to get through to our borders. So, man, I mean, it feels more, maybe it's just me, right? Maybe I'm biased. It feels more real because I'm right next to it. But
Can
here's,
I say something,
yeah,
Travis?
go ahead.
So I think it was 2015. I traveled down to the border, further south than you, and it is different down there. I don't care what anybody tells you. It's and you see, I mean, I honestly, what it felt like to me was kind of what it felt like 9/11 in New York. I mean, you had all these unmarked vehicles that you could tell were some sort of law enforcement, right? I mean, they were everywhere. There was just a different sense to, I mean, you were 10, 15 miles north of the border, they would check your passport. I mean,
Yeah.
so I agree with you. It's a different feeling down there. And so I just wanted to kind of echo your sentiment there.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And that's why, again, I appreciate you guys being here. But maybe the rule of thumb should be the closer you are to these things, right? Like in the panhandle, the grid goes down, these other things. I mean, maybe we should do possibly a little bit more preparation. At least that's what I'm doing. But let's move on to something else, okay? And I think this is a little bit
Well,
more.
sorry. Before you go, I just want to say it's not so. I understand we're called the Doomers News Network, and we talk about things a lot of people don't talk about. But actually, go to FEMA's website. Okay, they have all the checklist. They believe you should do this. They believe that you should be prepared. This is our federal government, whatever you may think about them, but they're not usually, we don't look at them as the people, the doomers, but they are very, very clear that every family should have an emergency preparedness plan with just exactly what you were talking about, Travis. So I just wanted to mention that we're not being crazy. Like this is something everyone should have.
Yes, the municipalities are legitimately preparing for extreme civil unrest. If you go to some of these colleges, and you look at how they're supposed to deal with civil unrest, I mean, they have huge plans. So I'm like, ask myself, well, if they're preparing for civil unrest, I mean, what are they worried about? And so let's talk about the next thing. So that's one thing, the grid, right? To the viewers, if you can afford it, I mean, just do what you got to do. We're not trying to scare you. I've told you what I'm doing. Jack and Melody told you their opinions. So we have multiple perspectives, but let's talk about something that's happening right now, cyber attacks. I mean, I really feel like every one of our social securities has been taken. Our date of birth has been taken. Where we've lived has been taken. I mean, it seems like every single data provider, Fidelity, Mr. Cooper, Melody, Jack, has been hacked. So now that we know, and we can confirm, and whether who's doing the hacking, we don't have to go into that necessarily, but it could be foreign governments, could be probably our own government. But are you guys, and I want to start with Jack here, and I want you to respond, Melody. Jack, are you concerned that there will be some type of cyber attack, whether it's right in the front end of election or after election? Are you concerned at all about a cyber attack? Do you think that it's fear mongering if I want to get an EMP? Or no. I'm sorry. It's the opposite. I want to be protected from an EMP, right? Is this just fear mongering? Am I delusional to want to prepare for these things, Jack? Tell me what your perspective is here.
No, you're not delusional, and there's nothing wrong with being prepared. As far as a cyber attack goes, am I worried about one? No, I'm not necessarily worried about one, but at the same time, I do think it's only a matter of time, right? I'd be surprised if we didn't have a massive cyber attack in the next few years, just based on the increasing frequency of some of these smaller and more mid-level cyber attacks. I was in Vegas for a conference last fall that coincided with the big hack at all the big resorts out in Vegas. And, I met a fantastic individual out there, got to talk to one of the guys who was on the front line of fighting that. I think if the average person knew how widespread these things were, they'd probably be more in your camp right now, Travis. So I do think it's going to happen. That being said, focus on what you can control. Obviously, the average person can't do anything to prevent a widespread cyber attack. So all you can do is be prepared to deal with the fallout of said cyber attacks. And the one thing I would mention in preparation for anything, guys, risk equals probability times consequence. So always keep that math in your mind when you're prepping for something, if that's what you're going to do here. Are you spending a lot of money on a high consequence event that has almost no chance of happening? That may not be a very good investment? Or are you going to spend maybe a smaller amount of money on something that maybe is a little bit of a lower consequence, like a power outage of a week or 2 or 3 days, but something that's far more likely to happen? Your dollars are going further in that regard in reducing your risk. So always keep in mind both the consequence of something happening, but the probability of it happening also.
Melody, your response?
Yeah. So like Jack, I don't worry about something like this because I can't control it. Right. And if I, if I can't control something, I don't spend a ton of time worrying about it. But like you're saying, Travis, I try to think about, okay, I worry about it long enough. Am I prepared? And to Jack's point, like, is this what I'm worried about the most? And I think, yeah, I mean, we have to me, we have to be prepared for cyber attacks. I mean, I come from the technology world. I can tell you probably your banks are way more at risk than you think they are. I've seen the back end of these systems of all of your large banks. So to me, knowing that is just, okay, do I have access to enough cash or gold to get through X amount of time? That's kind of how I think about it. And just understand, Whitney Webb, if you go out, she has a whole thing she does on freedom tech and just kind of, having tech for if something happens, a cyber. But it's kind of like what Jack says, for that event, I'm kind of more concerned about just making sure I have shelter, food, and water and power. And so be it a grid goes down, cyber event, those are the things I'm really focused on.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up because that's also kind of what I wanted to talk about. One of the concerns I have with cyber attack is my bank, right? Like, can they just wipe out my savings? Yep. And like, now everyone is broke. Well, first of all, almost everyone is broke, but I've saved a little bit of money and that is a legitimate concern. But let me tell you guys as well, like, again, it is crazy in Houston because just a few months ago, I don't really care about 2021. When we lost power, I also lost internet and cell service. I was completely wiped off of the grid. So we lost power, cell. We couldn't even call her parents. My wife's parents, we couldn't even call them. And so I asked myself, well, if that happens again, and there's some type of cyber, attack on the internet or whatever, cell towers, whatever, I've thought about this a lot. I wonder if Starlink would work, right? I almost got Starlink. The reason why I didn't get Starlink, guys, is because of the subscription. And I'm preaching to people, but I can't even afford another subscription at this point. But I'm like, man, I got my solar generator. If I have my Starlink, okay, that's helpful. And I also have my MREs. And I want to ask you guys whether or not you think, the generator, the MREs is a good idea. But let's move on to something else. Now, I've been hearing a lot about this. I haven't thought about it too much. I kind of lean on the side. It's maybe, listen, okay, if you're a viewer, I'm saying maybe because I don't trust the government. All right. I think maybe it's fear mongering. The food shortage. Okay. If people don't get food, they will turn to animals. I will have to defend myself. I don't want to have to do that. Is it a legitimate concern, starting with you, Melody, and if you can respond, Jack, is it a legitimate concern to think that whether it's before the election or maybe even a couple of years from now, Melody, do you think it's realistic to be concerned about any type of food shortage? And is there anything that we can do to prepare for that?
Yeah, I think this has a higher probability of a lot of things, actually. Okay. I here in the United States, we'll have access to things like rice. And we'll have more access than a lot of people across the world. But I do think that, especially we're hearing reports of the bird flu. We've seen culling of chickens. We've also seen smaller farms just not really being able to make it, like cattle farm, things like that. So to me, this has a higher probability that at least I might not be able to access all of the food that I like, that I want to eat, that there might be shortages of certain kinds of food, especially if geopolitical tensions, escalate. And so this is something, I started preparing for almost a year and a half ago. That's why I started the garden. I finally got my chickens yesterday. Everybody pray Congrats. For me because it's like taking their little lives into my hand is a little scary.
That's awesome.
Because they are just so little. But yeah, that's part of why I did this garden. And also just the idea that I really think that we need to get closer to the food that we consume. A big passion of mine. You can look at the ingredients here in the U.S. for a box of cereal, compare it to Europe. Europe has 4 ingredients. We have 35. And we're killing ourselves with the food that we eat. And so this is another one of my passions, and another reason though why I'm doing the garden, not just because I think there might be a food shortage, but I think for our health, we need to get closer to our food. I would say this one I take a little more seriously. And I don't think it's fear mongering. It's also part of the quality of life and how I want to live my life and how I want to spend my dollars. And I don't want to spend my dollars on crappy food that makes me feel crappy and that kills me. So
it's so amazing our difference in perspective. That's why I value y'all's how you articulate things and your opinions so much, because I thought this was more fear mongering. It's probably because where I live, I could drive to the ocean about an hour away, and within 24 hours, I can have 150 pounds of fish. You know what I mean? Hypothetically. Great stuff, Melody. Chickens. I want to do that too, actually. The garden. I want to do that too. Jack, your response.
I'm going to get off of mute first. So when it comes to food shortages, we can go back in history not too distant and see exactly that, right? 2022, we had food shortages all over the world, and there was civil unrest because of it. Now, really what that was driven by was the energy markets. Food is a derivative of energy because most of our food is grown using chemical fertilizers that are produced with either oil or natural gas. So if you want to see a food shortage coming, just watch the energy markets. And that's what gave us the spike in fertilizer prices in late 2021 that led to the food shortages in 2022. Now, the good news is here in the States, we're relatively food secure. We're very food secure here in the States. Not everybody, but for the most part, we have food security here because we're a food exporting country. So most of the pain is felt overseas in food shortages. Places like Sri Lanka had widespread civil unrest in 2022 because of that. It got more expensive here, but we didn't have outright shortages. And ultimately, we were able to stop that with the dumping of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve by the Biden administration. That's what brought down energy prices in 2022, stopped the energy inflation. And then by the time the effect of the SPR dumping had worn off, the economy globally had started to slow. And so energy prices had come back down, and the food shortage ended with that. Now, one thing I just want to mention, guys, we're talking a little bit about prepping and preparation here. As you're preparing for one thing, be very careful you don't open yourself up to something else. And keep in mind that risk equals probability times consequence. All right. I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I have gone to house fires that started because somebody was brooding baby chickens in his basement, and the heat lamp fell in the bedding, and it started a fire and burnt half the guy's house down. The chickens could not be saved. Well, the guy was trying to save a couple of bucks on eggs because of the bird flu pandemic. He ended up burning his house down. So, a house fire is something that happens far more often than a food shortage. So, Melody, please be safe. You're getting your birds late in the season. Young birds can't regulate body temperature, so you're going to have to keep them inside for a long time. Having birds inside is fun. They kick up a lot of dust. But just make sure you don't open yourself up to another issue, right? And, also you're mentioning like having cash in the house just in case the banks go down. Well, if you're raising birds and you have a fire hazard and you got cash in your house, now that cash has the fire hazard risk also. And, also if you're stacking gold or silver, make sure you don't open yourself up to risk of home invasion by making yourself a target. So always think about how, as you're moving out of one risk, you might accidentally be moving into another. Be smart about it. Don't overdo it in one direction or the other.
That's right.
Okay, good.
I think
Jack, what is your prep though? What are you doing to prepare? Do you not think that there's going to be a shortage? I know you said be cautious, but what are you doing exactly? You have MREs?
Well, let me go ahead. I'm going to do this because I'm a very skeptical, some might say paranoid guy. So even though I'm kind of like talking down the doom a little bit today, I'm probably more prepared than the average person. Probably, I've got a whole house generator. I've got a small little suitcase generator to back that up if it fails. And it's also useful on camping trips and things like that. I do have some MREs, but MREs are not a really good long-term prepping tool because the shelf life is short. They have to be inspected. They don't last forever. So, dry food like rice, like lentils, like dried beans in Mylar bags with O2 absorbers sealed in the bag in a 5-gallon bucket, that's something that's going to last 25 years versus a 5 or a 10-year shelf life of MREs. So, I mean, I do these things. I have these preps. They're insurance policies. I actually did a video about this about 2 years ago, trying to feed a family for under $100. This was in 2022. Good luck doing that now after the price increases. So, there's a lot of things you can do. Pace yourself. And again, plan for something that is a realistic scenario first. It's a lot cheaper to plan for a power outage that lasts a week than it is to prepare for the zombie apocalypse. So focus on what you can change first.
Melody,
and take a small step too, right, Jack? And I think, if you can't do any of this, get to know your neighbors. I mean, get to know who you can go to. Like if you need meat or you need things like that. So one thing I'm going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is we're kind of going to do a harvest event at the house where we invite everyone in, a kind of couple mile radius to just come for a cookout. And hopefully we can start to get to know one another, because if the power grid goes down, you need to know your neighbors.
Yes.
And so if you can do nothing else, that is what I would recommend. If you have no money, you have, have a way that you will be able to get to your family or get to one of your neighbor's house. And that would be, in my opinion, something, because I agree with Jack. I mean, every time I think about the gold issue, the cash issue, and then I think about the home invasion issue or something fire burning us down. And that actually happened to me when I was a kid. So it's something that I do think about. And Jack, we were very careful last night, very careful. Because I was the whole time because I had read your text about the fires. But do what you can do. And I think that's our message generally, right? You can't go out and, like a lot of people that are very rich, build these huge bunkers out in the middle of nowhere. Just take one step, be prepared, have a plan of what you're going to do the minute it goes down, then have a plan of what you're going to do in the next 24 hours. And then the next 48 hours, because I can tell you, and this is fitting that we're taping on 9/11, and maybe you planned that, Travis, but, I can tell you that none of my family could reach. Both myself and my sister were there together. So my parents both almost had complete nervous breakdowns because they could not reach us all day long. The first people to get through were actually people from overseas. One of my friends from New Zealand finally called in and was able to get in touch with one of my parents. And so be prepared for this. What's the plan if you don't have any type of communication? If you're meeting up with a family member, maybe you wait 6 hours and then you start moving to go meet that, so it's just think those things through and instead of buying a whole bunch of stuff or putting yourself at risk of home invasion, just have some sort of plan. And I think you'll have a leg up of most everybody.
Such an important thing, what you just said there. That may be the most powerful thing of all, which is if something happens, make sure you're tight to your community. If something bad happens, you're probably going to want the help. And you're probably going to want to help your neighbors as well. When we come together like that, we're stronger. We're more capable of looking out for each other. I love that, Melody. Some of the things that I've done, I have a couple boxes of MREs. All right, I do. I won't lie, and I have 2 freezers. So I have some food, got my MREs. I know how to hunt. I know how to fish. I know, how to clean, and I know how to do all of that. And so that's my prep. And I want to talk about just one more thing, and then we'll end this video out. And I think this is fair to ask. We're getting new reports now of things like monkeypox and, all this stuff. You guys concerned that it's possible and actually likely, or do you think it's fear mongering? Do you guys think we'll have another pandemic? And if you think that, what are some ways to prepare for that? I think about maybe getting a masks. I've purchased antibiotics, right? I have 4 children. Fear mongering, starting with Jack, fear mongering, legitimate concern, another pandemic. What do you think, Jack?
Well, I would point to the hat before I go on this rant, but look, there are questions as to the origins of the last one. I think it's silly that there's even questions. I think we all know where it came from, and it's pretty freaking obvious where it came from and that it was done on purpose. And so the tyrants of the world surprised themselves with how much power they were able to grab from the average person. They put the whole world on house arrest with very little pushback, and they convinced people to inform on their neighbors who weren't cooperating with that. They shut down small businesses. They debased the currency. They made themselves obscenely wealthy, causing inflation that made the rest of the world poor. I mean, 80 to 90% of the world is worse off financially than they were pre-pandemic. And the 10% that are better off are largely the people who were better off to begin with. So, unfortunately, they were rewarded for what they did last time. And I think that almost guarantees it's going to happen again. So, no, I don't think it's crazy to think we could have another one. I think, this was before I had my channel, but I was one of the ones in early or late 2020. Geez, let me get my months right. In early 2020, January, I was pounding the fist at work and among my friends, like, guys, there's this thing happening in China. You need to pay attention to this. It's spreading fast. It's going to be a big deal. And, everybody told me I was nuts and, that I was a conspiracy nut. And I just kept warning people, and I sounded like a lunatic. And then, well, we all saw what happened afterwards. So let's not rule anything out. It's the 2020s. I keep falling back to that.
What about the prep, Jack? What, you said you were ahead of it last time. You were warning people. How do you prepare? How do you prepare for something like that? You just get a mask? I mean, how do you prepare for that, man?
We had, because my wife and I were both nuclear employees, we had bird flu pandemic kits and SARS kits that were sent out to all the nuclear employees by our company. So we had a pretty good stockpile of like sanitary things like antibacterial, antiviral wipes, N95 masks, hand sanitizer. We had a lot of that stuff already. Plus, like I mentioned, I'm already, I don't want to call myself a prepper, but I am better prepared than the average person. That being said, I mean, everybody's got hand sanitizer in their house now. Everybody's got masks in their house from the last one. So I don't think you need to go out and start stockpiling medical supplies. I think that would be silly. I think easier things like food security can be done for cheaper, and an often overlooked thing is your prescription medicines. If there is some kind of widespread disruption of infrastructure, are you dependent on some medicine for your life? Well, then you better not let those prescriptions run low ever if you want to be prepared for something like that. Start with the small stuff.
Well said. Melody, your reaction?
Yeah, so I we'll see about the pandemic. I think that even if so a couple of things, I think if they tried lockdowns again, it would not go the same way. I really don't think so. I think people are mad. I think they've realized that a lot of that was unnecessary and ridiculous. I was also in the Philippines when they had an epidemic of the bird flu, and it's insanity, but people are still moving around. So to me, this one is more about, I'm not going to be prepping for this because God only knows and how useful any of those things could be. And, but I think you try to get your basic medicines like you're talking about, try to have some antibiotics on hand, thing like that. I think more than anything is be prepared mentally for how you're going to respond, because, I don't think I would respond the same way I did last time. And I think that I was a real useful idiot, at the beginning, likely because at the time I didn't participate in mainstream media at all, but I also didn't have any connection to social media. I'd really kind of cut myself off. And so I had to turn to mainstream media at first because I didn't have any alternatives. I also have a doctor in the family and was listening to that expert, but I was not well informed. Next time around, you better bet I'm going to be way more well informed. And I'm going to understand, I'm going to be digging for information. So I think that's more of how I will prepare if there is something like a pandemic again.
So basically, in order to prepare mentally, it's being informed, essentially. Is that right, Melody?
Yeah, it's making sure that I am running down, like I truly understand what's happening, and I have I have ways to go and test the narrative. I have places I can go to, the people that I trust to talk to about these things. And I more so have now those networks than I did before.
You know, I really appreciate both of your time. I think this was a great conversation, definitely able to put things in perspective, different perspectives. You know, when all is said and done, the biggest thing that I got from this conversation is the community. I mean, I think, again, with a strong community, I really feel like it doesn't even have to be big, say 100 people, 100 homes in subdivision. I think 100 homes united can last, man. You know, even if grid, cyber attacks, food show, I think that the more that we're united, the more that we can get through this. And that's what I got from this. Now, before we go, starting with you, Jack, anything you want to end on?
You know, like I said, probability times consequence. Always keep that math in your mind if you're prepping for something. You know, prep for something realistic, and you could burn through a lot of dollars if you decide, oh, I'm going to be a prepper now. Trust me, guys, you'll burn through money like you wouldn't believe before you ever get prepared for the apocalypse. It's not realistic for most people. One of the simplest things you can do, you can still get a little, it's not a great model, but a little like 800-watt suitcase size generator from like a Harbor Freight. It could cost you a little more than $100. It's not top of the line equipment. A lot of guys hate Harbor Freight because it's low quality. But it's an insurance policy just enough to keep your refrigerator running. So if you do run into a scenario like Travis had with the hurricane that knocks out power for 2 weeks, you don't have to throw out a refrigerator and a freezer full of food, right? A little generator like that, 800 watts, is enough to run even the biggest refrigerator. And that's enough to you can run it for an hour at a time, a couple times a day, to keep your food good. And, you know, it might actually save you money, because if you have a power outage and you have to throw out a refrigerator full of meat once, you've already paid for that generator. So that's a very simple thing you can do to make yourself prepared for a very likely but low consequence event.
Well said, sir. Melody?
Yeah, I just emphasize the, knowing your neighbors, the community, like you said, Travis, and also knowing locally where you can access things that perhaps you only get through online these days, or, whatever. Just having networks and awareness, and be thinking through, okay, if this happened, this is what I would do next. I think that more than anything, just having that conversation with yourself gives you a level of preparedness that a lot of people don't. But community is so important.
You know, great perspective, Melody. And to the viewers, let us know what you got from this video. Comment below, share the video, like the video, tell us what you learned. Tell us if we missed anything. We probably missed a ton of things, because like Jack said, you can't prepare for everything, but there is a lot you can prepare for with a little bit of effort. And so other than that, guys, we really appreciate you following along. Don't forget to love some people, and don't forget this, probably the biggest thing of all: math matters.